Do Christians actually have fun in the bedroom?
Many Christians really do. And there's a lot of Christians that don't. And we all read the same Bible.
Yeah, as a marriage and family therapist, we've actually spent over a decade working with Christian couples and trying to figure out why many of them are so dissatisfied in their sex lives, or have vanilla sex, or are just bored in the bedroom.
So we have made it our mission to figure out how to help them have more fun in the bed and out of the bed.
Yes. In this video and this episode, we're going to expose 3 beliefs that many Christians hold that really just kill sensuality and connection and fun in your marriage.
But before we get into those beliefs, let's talk about how we arrived at this place where well-meaning people like our parents, our grandparents, our Sunday school teachers, pastors, all those people actually embraced these lies and caused harm to the next generation. See, these beliefs are really deeply entrenched. So how far back does it go?
Let's do a little brief history lesson on sex shaming in the church. So the Roman Catholic Church was born in 180 AD, and St. Jerome began writing the Latin Vulgate in 382 AD, and it was sanctioned as the official scripture of the church. So let's fast forward. By 500 AD, the Bible had been translated into over 500 languages. But get this, by 600 AD, it was restricted to only one language, and that was Latin. The Roman Catholic Church just refused to allow scripture in any language besides Latin, and you could be executed if you were caught with non-Latin scriptures.
So there weren't a ton of people reading non-Latin scriptures. And
Exactly.
really, that really restricted the language for people because they didn't read Latin, only the clergy did. Mm-hmm. So what happened was the clergy defined really what everyone was reading. And they decided, hey, what are we going to emphasize and what are we going to withhold?
Exactly. They could promote whatever agenda they wanted to. So for the next 1,000 years, they believed and taught that sex was dirty and that sex was evil. And this is lie number 1. We're going to give you 3 lies. Lie number 1, sex is dirty. There was an influential theologian in the 2nd century, Origen, and he actually rewrote and interpreted Song of Solomon as a spiritual allegory between Christ and the church. He said in a commentary about Song of Solomon that a man who lives after the flesh will, quote, foster carnal desires in himself, and it will seem to be the divine scriptures that are thus urging and egging him on to fleshly lust. For this reason, therefore, I advise and counsel everyone to refrain completely from reading this little book.
And like, this is all really Gnosticism that has crept into the church. And if you really want to hear us talk about this more and how Gnosticism affected our body and how we see our body now, even in the modern times, it's affected by these old beliefs. So go check out our other podcast and YouTube video on body image.
Yeah, so we just now did that last week, a whole nother episode entirely focused on this idea that spirit is good, body is bad. That's not scriptural, but the church surely has perpetuated that narrative. So you could check out a link. We'll throw it here in the description, and you can see more about that concept and how it crept into the church.
So get this. To actually help people from falling into fleshly lust, the church made rules and regulations on sex, which kind of makes sense, but it did harm the church. Some of these rules have been since disregarded, and unfortunately, there are some rules that just kind of have held on.
Yeah, so one of the rules that has been disregarded is something like no sex on holy days. We don't see that anymore in the churches, at least most churches, I hope. But other rules like missionary position only, that still lingers in the modern church. Yeah. And this is lie number 2 that kills fun in the bedroom for many Christian couples today, that sex can only be done one way. Many people wouldn't admit that they believe this, but they live it out. They treat sex like it's just something they do to relieve themselves of pent-up pressure.
Actually, you could hear it in their language. People use words like, I need a release, as if what they're trying to do is like, get rid of something, get rid of their horniness. It's like they're numbing their lust. They're really trying to feel less of something than to pursue more of something, which is really what God created sex to do.
Yeah, they're not pursuing their God-given pleasure and desire. They're just feeling less of something bad rather than more of something good.
Right.
Another rule that the church made up in the late first century is that if you allowed yourself to feel the slightest inkling of pleasure, you were sinning. And sin required confession and monetary penance. So in short, the church began profiting from sex. Women in particular were really fearful for this whole millennium, because if a woman inadvertently expressed pleasure during sex, she could be put on trial. She could be judged a witch, tortured, executed. So even just this whole millennium, it was just plagued by this frustration, both for men and women, but specifically for women, that they couldn't show that they were taking pleasure in anything sexual or sensual.
So even after the Gutenberg press was invented, this idea or this mindset around sex really was thriving well into the 1800s. I mean, look at this. Even the mere glimpse of an ankle was considered so vulgar to the Victorian people that they covered the piano legs, because piano legs looked like women's legs apparently. Aww. And they covered them with tablecloths to prevent men from lusting after them.
And then in 1894, Ruth Smither's book, it was called Marriage and Love. She said this: give little, give seldom, and above all, give grudgingly. Otherwise, what could have been a proper marriage could become an orgy of sexual lust. Sex, when it cannot be prevented, should be practiced in total darkness. So again, it's re-emphasizing lies 1 and 2, that sex is dirty and can only be done one way.
Yeah, and I know this is probably surprising to you, but remember, how we feel about sex right now really is, it's handed down. It's this uncomfortable feeling that we have around it. It's not just for you, or it's not natural, but we've grown up with this kind of taboo around it.
Yeah.
So we've avoided talking about it. We've avoided teaching our kids about it. So it's not a huge surprise then that we have the idea or subconscious feelings that sex is dirty.
Right.
That it should be practiced very sparingly, or only for procreation.
Or only in the dark.
Only in the dark. I had a client come to me, they just became a Christian, and he told me, like, so you're supposed to have it sex, right? Missionary position, only in the dark, without music. I'm like, whoa, where'd you hear all this stuff?
Yeah.
So this happens, people.
Even though it was like, the origins of these rules and narratives go way back, it's still common practice. Fast forward to the 2000s, our era, I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Joshua Harris. Many of us grew up with that mindset that we ought not date or even call our person boyfriend or girlfriend. They were just our friend, right?
They're courting.
Yes. And we certainly weren't supposed to be holding hands or kissing before marriage, because it would be pure lust and that would be sinful. It was just equated with the worldly way of dating. And that's actually how we were advised when we were dating in 2006 to 2008. And we're not that old, folks. So this is pervasive. It's gone all the way into the modern era.
Right. And lastly, the last lie, the classic lie, stemming all the way back to the early Catholic theologians, and preserved throughout the centuries, that intercourse is reserved for procreation. And this is a lie. This is lie number 3.
Lie number 3. Even if we don't believe that it's only for procreation, many Christians live as if sex is primarily for procreation. Let's look at a Jewish perspective. The ancient Jewish women were actually given 3 fundamental rights. This is ancient Judaism, biblical times, all the way up until some modern times as well. 3 fundamental rights: food, clothing, and the onah. What's the onah? The onah is the sexual intercourse apart from the duty of procreation. And the onah extended into her non-childbearing years because they had the woman's pleasure as a primary focus of intercourse.
Right. We have to focus on the fact that there's actually a word for non-procreation focused sex.
Right.
So God is concerned, and ancient Judaism, this is the time that Jesus grew up, we're concerned with people, that the couple getting pleasure out of sex. And for anybody that's tried to make a baby, it's a really an interesting time. I remember really feeling it was very different, because now it wasn't just spontaneous. It wasn't just for fun for us way back when to have a kid. It became very focused on like an outcome. And for a lot of people, even that are working through infertility, it becomes very difficult for them because now they're outcome focused on their sex.
Yeah. Sex is utilitarian.
Yeah. And a lot of couples, as you know, have to work on that to keep it, loving and gentle and fun. So what we're trying to do is show that the Bible isn't only concerned about procreation. It is go into the world, be fruitful and multiply. But there also is provision for and commandment for loving each other in a sexual way that is for the sake of pleasure.
Right. Yeah. Even just staying on the ancient Judaism history, the Talmud even forbids men to travel for long periods of time because he wouldn't be able to meet his wife's sexual needs. So the ancient Jews, they even wrote the quality and the frequency of a man's sexual commitment to his wife into their marriage contract.
In the contract itself, like, hey, look, if you're traveling this much, you got to have this quality of sex, or you got to do it this much.
Yep.
So
There's a reason why Origen didn't want people reading Song of Solomon. It's chock full of passionate love. And not one time is sex for the purpose of procreation throughout the entire book of Song of Solomon. Yeah. So given his agenda, I can tell why he didn't want people reading it.
So here's the message, guys. Let's get back to the Bible, to God's plan for us to be full of joy when you're having sex with our spouse. Laugh a bit. Get passionate, get wild.
It's not dirty to have fun sex. It's not sinful to have fun sex. It's not shameful to have fun sex. Proverbs 5:19 says that our sexual intimacy should be exhilarating, ravishing, captivating, intoxicating, just depending on what version you read. Yep. We glorify God by cultivating a sexual desire for our spouse and by welcoming their sexual desire for us. And this, my friends, is fun.
Yes, so don't believe the lies. Today we're focused on the 3 lies that make sex boring for Christians. But next week, we're actually going to share 3 secrets for avoiding the sex drive decline after marriage, which a lot of people experience. And guys, we're going to get super practical and fun, so don't miss next week's episode.
Until then, join us this week in putting in a good word for sex. Change the attitude around sex in your home and celebrate it as God's gift.